Hello there. Welcome to Black in America. And I'm your host, Felicia Pearson, also known as Empowered Esquire. So, when I prefaced that I would be releasing this documentary, I discussed that we would examine whether or not Black people in America have actually made progress, or if everything that we're hearing and seeing is really just posture. Meaning, is there a concerted effort to convince people or the powers that be that Black people are making progress that, in fact, is not actually being made? So, we will look at both social progress or social equity and financial progress or financial equity to see if we can decipher the truth of what is going on here. So, what is social equity? Well, social equity, as defined by the National Academy of Public Administration, is the fair, just, and equitable management of all institutions serving the public directly or by contract, and the fair and equitable distribution of public services and implementation of public policy, and the commitment to promote fairness, justice, and equity in the formation of public policy. So, what does that mean? Well, social policy and social equity within it can include a variety of public contexts, include everything from education to policing to welfare to housing and even transportation. Planning for social equity means recognizing planning practices that have had a disparate impact on certain communities, and then actively working with the affected residents to create a better community for all, right? So, all in all, social equity focuses on an equal opportunity to access public services. That could include everything from equality in the justice system to equality in housing to equality in the public school system. So, as we begin to dissect whether or not Black people in America have achieved social equity, keep that in mind. Keep in mind that social equity is equal access to public services. In 2019, the nation's report card from the National Assessment of Educational Process, also known as NAEP, found that only 15% of Black eighth graders were at or above reading proficiency. About half of Black eighth graders didn't even reach the basic reading benchmark. And then the NEP released its results regarding high school seniors' literacy, and it was found that only 17% of Black 12th graders hit reading proficiency. As we previously discussed, social equity includes having equitable access to education. When you find such low rates of proficiency, it speaks to the quality of education that that group has available to them, right? So it says something for us to examine that the reading levels and the levels of proficiency in Black students are so low. It speaks to the ability for the community to actually be able to progress.
It was on a Monday morning in March when I woke up to take my middle school's FSA, or the Florida Standards Assessment, a test that, for most kids, was of utmost importance, given that it determines grade retention and class placement for the rest of the year. But I couldn't have cared less. After all, in just the week before, I had no electricity at home, hadn't eaten that entire day, and my close friend Jamie had just been hospitalized as a result of a shooting caused by gang violence. So with all of these external circumstances clashing in my life, how on earth could I possibly do well on an exam? The answer to that question was clearly evident in my scores, which, as you can probably guess, were failing, resulting in me being placed in all remedial classes. But even then, it didn't matter to me because I had even bigger problems, from taking care of family members to paying the bills that I had to face at home. However, I wasn't alone in my plight. You see, my same story is true for millions of other African American youth, and in their communities, this is business as usual. Problems like crime, violence, and drugs rage on, while our students suffer the consequences, leading to shocking yet predictable statistics, like the fact that only 16% of African American youth will be proficient in reading by the time they reach high school. And in many instances, by the time we find out this is the case, it is far too late to reverse the damage that has already been done to them by our broken schools. Damages that, if you were to visit my high school, you would see surrounding you at every corner in the form of students like DJ, who barely maintained a 2.0 average, or my friend Kyle, who had already dropped out, giving up on any hopes of graduation. What's happening here is that these kids realize they don't have any future academically, and have come to the grim understanding that their prospects of getting an education followed by a decent job are so slim they must look to crime as an alternative to providing for themselves and their families. And it all starts with one thing: literacy. You see, it doesn't take a college degree to sell drugs. All you need is desperation and a desire to make a quick buck, incentivizing these already poor, disadvantaged minority teens to partake in criminal activity, landing them in juvenile court. So, how do I know all of this? Because I was almost one of them. And in my experience, one of the worst things about this cycle is how we oftentimes end up blaming kids, the people who we should be trying to help, for problems like these that are perpetuated by our broken schools, attributing the misfortune of students like my friend Jamie to the ghetto music he listened to, the poor parenting he may have received, or just blatant stereotypes, like the notion that black youth are inherently bad. However, I knew that this was simply not the case. Kendrick Lamar, Jamie's favorite artist, wasn't a bad person. He simply used music as a means of expressing the damaged, crime-ridden childhood he had experienced, something many African American youth like myself can relate to. Jamie's mother, by all means, wanted to give him an education, but just didn't have the resources to do so. And finally, Jamie wasn't a bad kid, something which I am sure all of his teachers would agree with. However, what was truly bad were the things we had no control over, like the glaring educational inequality that existed in the schools we went to, what little instruction we received, much of which was beyond subpar, and the lack of resources that existed for us to be able to do well, even if we could receive a quality education. For me, this was internet access, something that was required for me to even remotely begin working on most assignments, particularly my English class's final project that consisted of a 20-slide-long presentation. But judging by how my family couldn't afford to pay for electricity, let alone a computer, there was no way I was going to turn in an entire PowerPoint by the next day. When I sprinted over to the library to work on it, it was closed. When I raced to the community center, they turned me down almost instantly. And when I went from door to door asking all of my friends and neighbors, not one of them had a computer for me to use. It was at that point that, having exhausted all of my options and breath, I should have just given up, knowing that I had tried my best, but nevertheless feeling defeated. Or at least, that is, until there was this one other idea that I had to try. Refusing to allow my circumstances to deter me, I went to extreme lengths, walking all the way to Best Buy, which was miles away from my house, in the middle of the night, just to fulfill my promise to finish that PowerPoint. And this seemed like a pretty good idea at the time, until it started raining. So, soaked and dripping wet, I arrived, and despite all of the confused stares I received, somehow managed to finish that PowerPoint. And that is the story of one of the very first A's that I had ever gotten.
This is a good time for us to have a discussion. Now, take in that story that we just heard. And I want to ask you, Drop your answers below in the comments. I want to have a conversation with you. Now, taking into consideration all of the challenges that you heard that young man has to face, do you think he has an equal chance at success as his classmates who are not at risk? Do you think that he lives in a world in which he has equity, meaning he has just as much chance at being a good student, a productive citizen, as someone who does not have to go through the challenges that he does have to go through? And my second question is, in a country where we have a public education system, do you think that our public education system should be providing more support, more assistance for students who are facing such tremendous challenges? Because as you heard, most of the students facing these types of challenges are students of color, and a lot of them are Black Americans. Now, the American Bar Association touched on social equity within the criminal justice system, and this is what they had to say. The net effects of history's injustices are staggering. According to the statistics provided by the NAACP, although Black people make up 13.4% of the population, they account for 22% of fatal police shootings, 47% of wrongful conviction exonerations, and 35% of individuals executed by the death penalty. African Americans are incarcerated in state prisons at 5 times the rate of white people. Black men face disproportionately harsh incarceration experiences as compared with prisoners of other races. Racial disparities are also noticeable with Black youth, as evidenced by the school-to-prison pipeline and higher rates of incarceration for Black juveniles. So as we can see, social equity within the realm of access to justice and access to the court system is also suffering in regards to the equitable and or equal status of Black people in America. And as I'm sure you would agree, statistics such as 47% of wrongful conviction exonerations show only a portion of the problem. Notice the word exonerations, meaning that the cases we are hearing about are cases in which people were actually cleared and found to be innocent. But how many innocent Black people are currently incarcerated, and it will never be discovered, it will never be proven, they will never be heard, and we will never know that they are actually wrongfully convicted?
There is a real wealth gap in America, one that corresponds with race. And now a new report is revealing just how wide that gap truly is. The report by McKinsey & Company shows a stunning wage gap totaling billions of dollars and a revenue gap of more than $1 trillion for Black-owned businesses. Now, one of the report's authors, McKinsey & Company Shelley Stewart, joins us now. Shelley, I've been watching your career for many years now, and you are just one of one in this space. We really appreciate your time and attention to this. And frankly, you know, a lot of people really don't know what to think of or how to contextualize Black progress right now. I mean, we have these spaces where Black Americans are excelling as first in their industries, and then you have others where they're being denied tenure or opportunities that are commensurate with their work. So what is the current state, Shelley, of affairs financially speaking? How do Black and white families compare when it comes to debt, net worth, and possibility?
Absolutely, Morgan, and thank you so much for having me. I think your point is exactly right. There are shining examples of progress, but we shouldn't conflate that with broader success or progress for Black Americans. You talked about wealth. 19% of Black Americans have negative net worth today compared to 8% of white Americans. So that literally means people have staggering amounts of debt that really does constrain their ability to live their life day to day.
And let's throw up some of the numbers here from your report. Black workers, number one, they make 30% less than white workers, averaging $10,000 less per year. And nearly half of Black workers are in low-paying service roles. And then there are these so-called consumer deserts and discrepancies in negative net worth. So, Shelley, what does that actually mean?
Yeah, I mean, this wage and income gap is a huge issue. I mean, there's lots of discussion about creating wealth. Well, it's pretty hard to save when you're making $30,000 a year. You're burdened with your rent. You're burdened with food costs. If you even have accessible fresh food in your neighborhood, as you mentioned, there's a huge portion of Black Americans that do not. And so, we really have to get underneath what is driving this disparity in wages. We found that just 20 occupations, 4% of all occupations, make up 60% of that wage gap. We need more Black teachers, more Black lawyers, more Black doctors, and we got to promote Black folks across all industries and pay them equitably if we're going to start to think about saving.
So teachers, lawyers, and doctors, and I have to say that's something I really liked about this report because it was solution-oriented, right? It was data-driven and solution-oriented. So what is the solution here? I mean, if some of these disparities are addressed, what would that impact be financially? And frankly, how do we do it?
Yeah, I mean, just getting Black workers up to median in terms of wages would put 2 million more Black Americans in the class.
Wow.
That's a staggering figure. And I think it really starts pretty far upstream with how we think about and support public education and public health care. We have got to find ways to support our low income and our Black students with resources in their schools. We found that in highly concentrated Black schools, there was an $1,800 per pupil funding deficit when compared to highly concentrated white. That has all sorts of downstream implications. And we've got to fix our access to affordable health care for all Americans. We've got a 3 to 4 year life expectancy gap that are faced by Black Americans. If that were closed, there'd be 2 million more Black people alive today. Wow. That's a staggering figure.
Yeah, that is staggering. And I think what surprised me was I'm a data junkie. And so when I was going through this report, the numbers were wild. And I'm curious, as someone who is actually compiling these numbers, what surprised you most?
Yeah, I think your point, Morgan, is right in terms of just, I had that same reaction. Like, I cannot believe the magnitude of some of these numbers. I mean, you flashed one up at the beginning, $1.6 trillion of revenue that's not flowing to Black-owned businesses. If we were at parity, there'd be another 600,000 Black-owned businesses. I think that was one that stuck out. And then every year, there's $300 billion of wealth flows that I'll say are missing from the Black community if we had our fair share. 60% of that is inheritance. And so just staggering gaps across the board.
Well, Shelley Stewart, we appreciate you bringing us this report and then helping us really understand and contextualize it, because especially in this moment in our country, that is what is most needed. Shelley Stewart III, thank you so much for joining.
So what say you, my empowered Esquire TV audience? What do you think? Do you think there is truly a racial wealth gap, and does it hint at the possibility that all of the symbolic progress we've been seeing for Black people in America is just that, symbolic, and not an actual reality? Well, let's continue the conversation, but drop your comment below. Let me know what you think about the information we just heard. And now, let's continue the discussion. Perhaps as we continue and get into our next sections, your opinion will evolve. See Figure 1 from this Federal Reserve Board study, which shows that white families have more wealth than Black, Hispanic, and any other multiple race family in 2019. So if you look at the two charts here, at the top, you'll see median net worth. At the bottom, you'll see mean net worth. You can see illustrated very, very, very clearly the difference in wealth, right? You can see that for the most part, white families have a much higher median net worth and a much higher mean net worth than that of Black and Hispanic families. And most importantly, what you'll notice is that on a whole, Black families are at the bottom of this net worth scale. Concerning? Yes. And I think an insight, right? A window into whether or not true progression is being made. Looking at Figure 2, you will see that Black and Hispanic families experienced faster growth in wealth over the last two surveys after experiencing larger declines in wealth that were caused by the Great Recession. So you can see here, as observed, the wealth status for the years of 2007 through 2010, as denoted by the darker blue, 2010 through 2013, as denoted by orange, 2013 through 2016, as denoted by the lighter blue, and 2016 through 2019, as denoted by the light green. So in other words, what is being depicted is that after experiencing larger drops in wealth and finances during the Great Recession, you did have Black and Hispanic families getting on their feet, right? Having faster growth after having that drop. But the problem is, again, that this faster growth is after a larger decline. So common sense wise, right, you may see something that appears to be faster growth in a group of people who had a larger decline, right? It does not necessarily mean that those groups of people, right, in particular here, Black families, ever truly reached where they were before the Great Recession. So as you're considering this, you have to make sure you couple those two things together, right? Fast growth, yes, after a large decline. Table 2 illustrates that white families are more likely to receive inheritance and other things of that nature in form of family support than our Black and Hispanic families. So if we take a look at this table, we see that 29.9% of white families received an inheritance. We see that only 10.1% of Black families did, and only 7.2% of Hispanic families. Then we look at conditional median inheritance, and we see that the white percentage is 88.5%, and the Black percentage is 85.8%. So overall, when looking at this table, we can see that the familial passing of wealth, meaning from mother to daughter, from father to son, from grandmother to grandchildren, right, and so on and so forth, is significantly lower amongst Black families than white families. Part of that has to do with levels of education and access to wealth, right? And that is also illustrated at the end of the table, where you see that only 24% of Black families stem from a parent which has a college degree. So yes, I think it can be said that education is a part of that. But notice the other part is the access to wealth. Because in order for someone to leave something behind, right, for one to pass something on to the next generation, one must first have something to pass on, right? So the person's access to wealth is directly related to their ability to then give that wealth, to then bequeath that wealth to the generations after them. And it speaks very loudly that there is not much of an inheritance for Black families. That speaks to how much access to wealth their predecessors actually had. So as we see in figure 3, homeownership rises with age, and that is regardless of racial background or ethnic background. Pretty much meaning that the older someone is, the more likely it is that they are a homeowner. Now, if we look at this chart, however, you will still notice that in the Black community, there is a significant gap as far as how many Black people in America are homeowners. We see that if you look in the under 35 age group for the orange bar, you will see that a little under 20% of Black Americans who are under 35 years old are homeowners, right? Now we hop over to the age group of age 35 through age 54. You will see that a little over 50% of Black Americans who are in that age group are homeowners. And then in the over 55 age group, you'll see that it is almost at 60% rate of homeownership in the Black American community. Now, what is curious to note is that whereas you have a little under 20% of Black Americans under the age of 35 owning a home, you have almost 50% 30% of white Americans under the age of 35 owning a home. So you are looking at a approximately 30%-ish gap there. Then when you move into the next age group, right, again, you're looking at about 50% for Black Americans, but you're looking at a little over 70% for white Americans. So about a 20% gap there. Then when you get into the over 55 age group, you are looking at almost 60% for Black Americans and almost 90%, right, somewhere in the mid 80% for white Americans. So again, another significant gap. And so what you can see looking at each age group is that it does not even matter what age the person is. If the person is a Black American as opposed to being a white American, they are automatically facing a large potential gap in home ownership. So you have to ask yourself, well, what causes this gap in home ownership? Well, when you look at the things that are required to own a home, we have a great hint there as to what could be happening. For those of you who aren't familiar with the home ownership process, a person who seeks to buy a home has to have a significant amount of money that they have at their disposal. And I mean liquid cash, right? Actual capital, not assets. Bear that in mind. Now, why does the person need this capital? Well, there are closing costs, there are down payments, and then there are other things that have to happen during the home buying process. For example, the home has to have an inspection. That is at the cost of the buyer. And a home inspection can cost as much as $1,000. The home has to be appraised. That is also at the expense of the buyer. Another issue that can cost anywhere from $1,000 to $3,000 to $4,000, depending on the home and the area that the home is in. So you are looking at anywhere from $2,000 to $5,000 in cost that do not include a down payment, which could be anywhere from 5% of the entire purchase price and beyond, to closing costs, which could be anywhere from 20 to 30% of the entire purchase price and beyond. So all in all, it is very likely that what is causing this gap in homeownership between Black Americans and white Americans is the racial wealth gap. That makes the most sense, right? It's the access to capital that you can then use to make a large purchase, such as a home. So it goes without saying that a large indicator in the quality of life for any group of people is their ability to retire. Their ability to eventually say, I have passed working age and I am now going to rest. The ability to retire speaks to the quality of life and also whether or not that group of people is living in equitable conditions. Okay, so let's talk about that, shall we? We see here in Figure 4 charts that display retirement account ownership. So these charts show each group of people within America, right? Each large ethnic group, and whether or not that group actually has a specified retirement account. So if you look at the age group of under 35, you will see that about 30% of Black Americans who are under 35 have an actual retirement account. But over 50% of white Americans in that same age group do. Well, you're probably thinking not so bad, right? I mean, if you're under 35, you should be saving for retirement, but you're not yet at the danger zone, right? Okay, well, let's get over to the danger zone then. Ages 35 through 54. Now, this is the danger zone. If you are in the age group of 35 to 54 and you have not yet begun to save for retirement, you are in big trouble. Okay, so, a little over 40% of Black Americans have a retirement account in this age group, but over 60% of white Americans have a retirement account in this age group. Again, a gap that is significant.
And then when we get into the over 55 age group, we see an even more significant gap, right? We see almost 30% as opposed to, again, over 50%. So when we see this gap in retirement account ownership, it tells us that Black Americans are much less likely to have an actual retirement account, an account that is specifically for them to retire.
Now, to state the obvious, there has been a legislative action taken from about the 1930s up until present day that directly affect the lives of Black people in America. But since legislation such as the Civil Rights Act of 1964, have we really seen any substantial progress in the lives of Black people in America? Now, ultimately, this is a question that, hey, it's open for interpretation and discussion. But based upon everything that we have discussed today, I think we have a picture of, as I previously said, an issue with symbolic progress. The first African American woman to do this, or the first African American person to do that, the first Black attorney general, the first Black surgeons general, etc., etc. All of these things are symbolic progression when we look at the statistics for societal progress or social equity and financial progress or financial equity. The numbers tell a different story. Thank you for joining me for this short, mini documentary on Black people in America. Progress or posture? This has been another installment of Empowered Esquire TV. And let me know in the comments, what do you think? Is it progression or is it just symbolic?